Welcome back to part 2 of Module 11, Lesson 1, where we continue our study of biased and unbiased sample. Now we're going to get into those particular definitions with an unbiased sample being obtained using a valid sampling method that is random and representative of the population. When sampling a non-representative population is going to be a biased sample. For example, if you only sampled the girls about what they thought about football, that would be pretty biased. But if you only sampled the football players about what they thought about football, that'd be pretty biased as well. A biased sample usually favors certain parts of the population over others. Expand to see the difference between biased convenience samples, which we're going to have right here, and we're also going to be looking at voluntary response sample, which are going to be two of our different bias samples we got. A convenience sample we have is this sample includes members of the population that are easily accessed. You give the survey to the students that eat lunch with you to find out the information about the middle school students. This is not going to be a randomly chosen sample, and it's not representative of the whole population, because the people you eat lunch with, they probably think more or less along the same lines you do. Meanwhile, the voluntary response sample involves only those who want to or can participate in the sampling. A school principal sends out a survey on a social networking site asking middle schoolers students to vote for their favorite restaurant. This sample involves only those who choose to participate, and the response will likely favor opinions that come from people who feel very strongly on this topic. So once again, that is going to be a biased sample. Suppose you want to determine the favorite pizza shop of middle schoolers in your city. Drag the icons that represent a bias sample to the bin. Well, first of all the middle school students that rode a bicycle to school are surveyed. Not very good, because number one, they're going to be the kids close enough to the school to ride a bike. That's definitely going to be biased. A social media poll is sent to all middle school students. The winner is chosen from the participants. We just talked about that. That's also going to be biased because they got to choose whether or not to participate. Every ninth student that walks through the door of the cafeteria survey, probably not going to be biased because that's a specific random sample, and pretty much all the middle school students have to go through the cafeteria doors. And then finally, every person in the culinary section of a bookstore on Monday evening is surveyed. That's, I'm thinking, going to be biased because that's going to be only focusing on people who really care about food. Let's see if I'm going to be right. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, that one should have been biased. So let's check on that, and now we got a good answer right here. Easy math. Example number 2 says they want us to identify if the type of bias sample in each situation. Drag the appropriate bias sample type to the situation that best describes it. And the first one says, because only those people that choose to respond will, the sample is a voluntary, let's try that again. Because only those people that choose to respond will, the sample is a voluntary response sample. Or because the sample is everyone that is available, and therefore it is a convenience sample. So we want to know, is what they're giving us here, are we looking at voluntary response, or are we looking at a convenience sample? The two different types of bias samples. The first one, to gather information about the favorite animal of middle school students. A student asked everyone in his 7th grade language arts class. Well, that's going to be a convenient sample because he only asked the students that were right there in the class together. They were convenient to him. Meanwhile, a news organization posts a survey on its website that asks its readers to vote on a current topic. That's going to be a voluntary response sample because only the people who choose to get on the website, look it up, and take the survey are going to be responding to their survey. Once again, this is a biased sample. Now you take a minute, pause the video, and work extra example 2 on your own. The principal sends an email containing an online poll to graduating seniors, asking where they prefer to hold their graduation. The responses received are used to determine the location of the graduation. How is this going to be biased? It's going to be biased because it's voluntary response. The students can choose whether they respond or not, and quite frankly, most seniors are going to say, yeah, I'm not wasting my time on that. Next one. In order to find your favorite kind of music of 7th graders in the United States, a student takes a survey of her class. Now, most schools are fairly racially divided. You are biased in the racial things, and music is quite often racially divided too. So you're not going to get a very random sample if you're taking and looking at just those in your class, because most schools do not have a very even population of the demographics, just for starters. Also, you may have more boys than girls. That's another place you can have difference in taste in music, because boys don't like Bieber. I'm just saying. That, therefore, would be a convenient sample. All those check. Easy math. If you have used a valid sampling method to obtain an unbiased sample response as representative of the population, you can use the results to make inferences, and inferences are going to be known as predictions about the population. Let's highlight that. This is called a valid inference because it's from a valid sample, and a valid inference is an inference that is based on a biased sample. An invalid inference is an inference that is based on a biased sample. An invalid inference makes a conclusion not supported by the results of the sample. So let's take a look at these. You got valid inferences and invalid inferences. So your sampling method for a valid inference uses a valid sampling method. The invalid obviously does not use a valid sampling method. For the sample, it's drawn from an unbiased representative group. Meanwhile, the invalid is coming from a biased or an unrepresentative group. And then your conclusion, the conclusion is that it is going to be supported by your data in a valid inference, while an invalid inference, that's going to be making some jumps that are not going to be totally supported by the data. With that, let's look at example 3. It says that on a social networking app, a burrito company asked participants to vote on their favorite style of food. The choices were Italian, Mexican, and Indian. The results from those who chose to respond are shown. The company infers that the most popular style of cuisine is going to be Mexican. Identify the type of sampling method used and then determine whether the inference is going to be valid or not. So you can see that 21% picked Italian, 46% picked Mexican, and 33% picked Indian. So from here, how can we have more people pick Indian than Italian? I mean, really? All right. So first off, this is going to be a, well, let's see. What do y'all think? I'm thinking it is going to be a voluntary response, because they put it out online and let people volunteer whether or not they're going to respond to it, and therefore it is going to be a biased sample. Check it, and it checks. Easy math. Let's see what else they have for us. Next, we're going to say because a company used a biased sampling method, they can or cannot make a valid inference. They cannot make a valid inferences based on the sample. The inferences made by the company, therefore, are not a valid inference. So we've answered that part correctly. Next part, oh, that looks like it. Well, all right then. Excellent. Now it's going to be your turn to take and look at extra example 3 on your own, answer the questions associated with it, and then see if you can get them right. How did it go for you? Let's take a look at what I have. A radio station asks its listeners to indicate their preference on one of 2 candidates in an upcoming election. 62% of the listeners who responded preferred candidate A, so the radio station inferred that candidate A is the preferred candidate to their listeners. Well, here's the question, the big thing here. Who responded? That means it was a voluntary response question, and since it's a voluntary response question, it is going to be biased. So let's take a look right here. This is going to be a voluntary response system. question. So that's going to be biased. Check. That checks. Now, therefore, the conclusion is not valid, so they cannot say that yes, indeed, candidate A is going to be the winner because they did not do a good solid survey of the entire population. A good example of a biased sample. For example number 4, the manager of a shoe store wants to determine its customer's favorite color of shoe. Every third customer is surveyed. That is a simple random sample. No, I'm sorry, that is a statistical random sample, I think. The results are shown. The store manager infers that their customers most prefer the shoe that is colored red. Identify the type of sampling method used and then determine whether it's valid or not. So let's get into this. First off, that is going to be a systematic random sample. I said statistical, it's systematic random sample, and therefore it is going to be, I'm going to say not biased, because they're all only looking at the people in their store, yes, but they're looking at everybody coming in their store. So from there, we're going to, or was everybody, or was it, yep, every third customer. That's a simple random sample there, every third customer. And then now, because the store had an unbiased sampling method, they can make inferences based on the sample, and the inferences made by the store manager is going to be a valid inference. That's all there is to doing these. Easy math. We'll go ahead and reset that one. And now we're going to skip over to the very last problem, extra example 4, which you're going to work on your own. A quality control engineer for a technology company tests every 50th fitness tractor. So right there you have a random sample taking place on the conveyor belt. She finds that 1 in 100 did not meet the quality control standard and infers therefore that 1% of the fitness tractors do not meet the standard. First, what type of sampling method is being taken? That is just going to be a simple random sample. I'm sorry, that's going to be a systematic sample. Now we can also say that this sample is going to be not biased because it's a very systematic sample. Everything checks. You can go from there and add that the inference therefore is going to be valid, so you can take the data that they're giving you with it and actually expect a good result as far as whether or not the whole population would agree. And that's going to be it for this lesson. Get busy on your homework, and I will be happy to entertain any questions you have in class tomorrow.